the duck curve, and how storage can solve our problems. This is Energy Matters with Claire
and Dan.
All right, so this is a fun one. Everybody in the energy industry talks about the duck curve a lot. So I think for all of our listeners, let's first explain what it is, because it's happening in California, in New England, potentially in Spain and Portugal. Basically, in the middle of the day, solar power is at its peak, which reduces the need for energy from traditional sources, creating a dip in the net demand. It's great for renewable output, but also means that the grid's handling less conventional load than usual. Just as the sun begins to set, electricity use spikes, right? People are going home, they're turning their lights on and their appliances on, they're charging their devices and their electric vehicles. Solar power drops off quickly, and other power sources must ramp up quickly to fill that gap. That sudden surge in the demand is the steep neck of the duck. It's almost like a vertical ramp in demand at somewhere between, 6, 7 p.m. That is the steep neck of the duck curve, right? And it's when grid operators must respond in real time to the fact that there's this steep neck of the duck curve. By early evening, demand reaches its highest point with solar offline and usage peaking, and the grid must heavily rely on fast start conventional generation to keep up. So Dan, I know that it's been a big issue in California. Tell us some of the percentages of California that's served by solar right now and how big of a deal this is in California.
Yeah, no, it really has been. And utilities have literally feared the duck. And I guess since we have a hockey team, the Anaheim Ducks, that's kind of appropriate. But what you're thinking about here is that demand is low or flat at night. And then the more renewables on the grid, you dip during the day and you dip more and more based on more renewables. And then you have this ramp that really is the worry for utilities that you just described, Claire. And then the beak of the duck comes back down at the end of the day and kind of connects with the tail of the duck, since it happens a cycle and cycle and cycle. And so utilities in California have looked at this and said, well, this is really horrific. We have this thing called nighttime. So the solar is going to go down. And we, the conventional utility operators, are literally left holding the bag, or I guess holding the neck of the duck. And we need to have all of this generation supply available at the snap of a notice as we bring it online. And so that conversation has gotten pretty severe in California, where that ramping can be incredibly steep, and those generators, which are generally peaker plants, meaning they're generally gas-powered plants, are going to have to be brought on right when everyone's out. And what this also means is that we peak our emissions then too. And so utilities have said that as we move to more and more distributed solar, this can cause an effect which is up to 50% change in the overall needed amount of electricity from, largely these conventional sources. And that's been the fear. And I guess the thing that I love and I want to talk with you about and also hear responses from our listeners is that I regard this as kind of the embodied battle between the clean energy sustainability crowd, I put myself in that category, and then the regulators or the economists who see this in the exact opposite light. They see this as a huge challenge for utilities. I view it as a huge opportunity. And so we should get into that a little bit too.
Part of the reason this is so hard for utilities is that not only do grid operators have to bring a ton more dispatchable power online, but they have to do it in a really short window during the late afternoon and early evening, which stresses gas peaker plants and other fossil fuel generators. And as we know, natural gas peaker plants are really, really expensive to install and operate and maintain, which is part of why a bunch of utilities, including Baltimore Gas Electric, are offering things like peak rewards programs, right? They're coming to your home and they're saying, if you're willing to turn off your air conditioning from 3 to 6 p.m. on these July summer days, we'll pay you money.
And it's funny because I guess I regard this as incredible business opportunities that utilities have just been really reluctant to look at because they're used to very, very predictable, very steady loads. And for any energy historians out there, if there are any, I guess the view is that in the old days, people thought that the peak demand was going to happen during the afternoon on a hot, sunny day when everyone has their air conditioning on. But now what we're finding is in this new world that the peak demand actually happens in the evening, often on cold, rainy days, because we don't have that solar. You have this issue that more and more companies and people are generating behind the meter with solar. And so it's a big mindset shift, but for me, it seems like a big business opportunity.
It is a big business opportunity. And I think one of the things that's so sad about all of this is that to avoid overgeneration, oftentimes in New England and in California, in our country, solar and wind output is curtailed, meaning it's turned off, meaning it's not allowed to be used at the grid. So you're wasting free, clean energy that we should be using.
And so enter the battery. Right. So
Right.
to me, a battery is the most wonderful glue that holds the grid together. And I kept thinking utilities would embrace that because they could install batteries, they could contract for batteries, big commercial ones, but also just the battery in your or my car. And yet that has not been the mindset at every utility hearing I go to. They bemoan the duck. And I'm just so surprised that this just goes on and on.
Right. And it's not only happening in the United States, it's happening all over the world. Now, full disclosure, the massive blackout that happened on April 28th of 2025 is still under investigation. But there in on that date, Spain and Portugal experienced a sudden widespread blackout when 15 gigawatts of generation dropped offline within 5 seconds. Give me a sense of scale, Dan. That 15 gigawatts, how many coal-fired power plants or nuclear power plants is that?
So the simplest number would be that's about 15. And I guess the way I think about it is that 15 gigawatts, that's actually pretty close to the average demand on a reasonable day that the utility sees in all of California, 45 million people, 45 plus or minus 5 million
Right.
people. So it is a big chunk. And we also had just recently, Spain announced that they ran their grid entirely on renewables for a day, something that many places, Costa Rica does, California is getting close to doing it. And so this is a big deal. And the duck curve is something to be planned around. I just regard it as a way that clever utilities and interested investors should be saying, well, let's build more and more storage. And in fact, in a place like California, what we're now seeing is there are no more subsidies for installing just solar, but you can get a subsidy when you install solar and storage together. And so you have tamed or calmed, or I guess in Beijing, eaten the Peking duck if you're installing renewables and you're installing storage at the same time. This is like a wonderful synergy to me, whereas every utility meeting I go to, someone is almost crying about this.
Right. Yep, absolutely. And shameless plug here at Sunrock Distributed Generation, that is in fact what I'm spending all of my time on is how do you install solar plus storage effectively.
Well, wait,
What
so tell me about it, because to me, this is actually the key and really the cool story, because it's been reported now for several years that it's now cheaper to build a new renewable energy power plant, solar or wind, than to simply operate an existing fossil plant. And my daughter at Bloomberg New Energy Finance actually just reported on this last week in their latest data circular. So it's a real thing. So tell me, how does this come up to you in terms of getting people who are already saying, well, maybe I should go into solar. Now you're saying go into solar and storage.
Sure. So in California, it is unfortunately state specific and utility specific. But in California, to keep going with that trend, it's called Net Energy Metering 3.0. So if you want to get subsidies, the self-generation incentive program, you have to install not just solar plus storage. And what we're finding at Sunrock and everyone in the country is that developers that come to us asking for financing realize that they have to do solar plus storage. And a lot of these folks don't understand tax equity. They don't understand how financing works. They're just trying to figure out whose modules can we use? Are we supposed to safe harbor? Should we be using domestic content? How are we going to get these interconnections approved? It becomes really complicated really fast.
But this is so, I know you might think I talk about California too much, and maybe I do, but last time I checked, we have nighttime everywhere.
Yes.
And
Yes, we
so
do.
this duck curve is actually, this is a universal. This is like a migrating duck. This is not just some duck that sits in a pond in California or in Spain. So when you talk to a client and they're interested to do solar, but somehow they're afraid of adding storage, isn't that just means they're afraid of the economic upside of installing reliable, low-cost power? Or what am I missing here?
No. So if you're talking about the customer or what we call the off taker, the person that's buying the energy, they don't understand the technology, right? They're making their widget, they're building their carpet, they're
But I don't understand my television.
sure what they're, I mean, I can tell you Monterey County, with whom Sunrock is installing solar plus storage now, was concerned and understandably slow about Moss Landing. So there was a big explosion in Moss Landing in January of 2025. And you probably know more about it than I do. So tell me what happened.
So just for the audience, so Moss Landing in the old days was an oil powered power plant. Then it became a gas fired power plant, and now it has become the largest single utility scale battery in California. It's a whole series of buildings that looks like trailers, and they did have a fire. They did have to shut part of it down. And I guess to put it in scale, maybe, when we wrote the legislation in 2013 that required, in a bit geeky language, it said that by 2020, California must be able to meet 2% of its peak energy demand with new forms of storage. Battery, moving rocks up hills, the kind of batteries in your cell phones, but also a liquid battery called a flow battery, a whole variety of technologies. And that 2% today, fast forward to 2025, Moss Landing is bigger than 2% by itself.
Wow.
So it's a big player, and it did go down, but I guess I regard this as kind of a quirky feature in the sense that if you add up all of the electric vehicles and all of their batteries across the state, or many places, the UK has more than 2.5 million EVs. I just came back from Italy where you basically trip over EV chargers in some of the parking lots. They're becoming more and more common, and all those batteries could be aggregated together to sell power back. To meet the
Understood.
duct.
But I mean, I'm pushing back on you on that. I mean, Moss Landing, California damaged 300 megawatts of the plant's lithium ion batteries. The
That's
answer
right.
to that,
And to me, that's actually it's not a good thing, but to me, it's actually a learning curve in the sense that um, these big battery installations are new. They're not so new in China, and they're even bigger there. But these batteries are a way to figure out and to manage what the utility scale issues are going to be. But we have all this distributed power. So I agree. Moss Landing should not go down. Managing batteries is really just about air conditioning and cooling systems. It's not difficult.
so Dan, let's explain for our audience what a peaker plant is.
Sure. So peaker plant is hopefully pretty close to what it sounds like in the sense that if you have a gas turbine, you often see them when you walk into buildings. There's a little fenced off area out back, and there's a gas generator. There's like a oversized Honda generator. Some places still have these older ones that run off of even diesel and various things. And when they're asked, they can be turned on. Now, often they're loud and noisy, and whenever there's a fire drill and the building power goes down, you always have to talk over these loud things in the backyard of your building. But the idea of a peaker plant at a commercial scale is it's a power plant that's basically waiting for the right price signal to turn on to sell power in because there's some critical need. In the old days, peaker plants generally came on late in the day when the hot conditions meant that people were running the air conditioning. And just like in the neck of the duck curve, your office was still turned on and people were turning on things at home. So demand went up. Peakers had to fill that gap of supply. Now, in the newer world of renewables, what we've been talking about before is what hopefully holds, and that is more and more places like my home in Oakland, California, has solar on the roof, but also a stationary battery in the garage. And so my mini peaker is I've stored up solar in that battery during the day. I get a signal from my utility and I sell power back. Now, that's not what we do commercially yet where I lived in California, but that's what we could be doing anywhere where this issue comes up.
Sure. But I mean, let's be honest, not everyone can afford solar and storage on their house, right?
That's right. But what's interesting about it is that increasingly, at least in California and in projects I just came back from actually in Italy, there are programs, not always subsidies, but programs to encourage communities to install storage. And so I actually helped to install a project called the Eco Block in California. And there we have solar distributed on the rooftops in this 40 home enclave. And there are three distinct locations. Two are former garages. One is just on the side of a building where there's banks of batteries. And so the solar is individual, if you will, but the batteries are collective. And they then have a deal with utility. They sell power back from that aggregator, that battery bank, and everyone benefits.
Right. And you could argue that there's a case in Hawaii as well, where there are banks of batteries with homeowners, and 1,200 batteries are being managed by a technology called Grid Amp, which once was owned by Swell and now is owned by Sunrock Distributed Generation. Again, a shameless plug.
I like that.
Yeah, again, a shameless plug. So let's go back to the Moss Landing fire, because if the question is why is not everyone doing battery storage yet, the answer to me is very obvious, which is there was a fire, which was a nickel manganese cobalt lithium ion battery. And no one wants a fire on their campus, right? I make my carpets. I'm a company that is managing waste, right? I don't want to deal. I don't want my utility rates to be as high as they are, but I want storage, but I don't want my campus to go on fire. So why is it that we're more comfortable with a Tesla Megapack than we were with a technology that was nickel manganese cobalt?
Well, I guess remember that I said that this was the largest battery in California, and first of its kind technologies are new. I mean, that's kind of the definition, right? So if we talk about anything where you're in the race to be second, you want to see someone prototype it and someone work it out. That was Moss Landing, and they figured out, oh, we should have better air conditioning. We should actually have better sensors and monitors. So if a battery is overheating, we shut that unit down and use a different one. And I don't want to say a fire is a good thing. I'm certainly not saying that. But I do think that this is part of the learning curve of if we're going to do new solid state technology, we should actually go all the way and actually have, a dense bank of sensors so we can check out what's going on. It can be automatic or managed in different ways. And so we treat it well. And those people driving around in their electric vehicles have a battery in them. Companies have a battery. And these batteries are much safer than some of those diesel generators, those peaker plants sitting outside buildings, which themselves have had leakages of the stored fuel and this and that. So I regard it as a teachable moment. I don't regard it in any way as like a reason why a company wouldn't want to get in on, let me have a well-managed battery, probably managed by a third party, and I'm going to make money selling power back not only when my solar is generating, but I'm going to make even more money in the evening selling power out of my battery because that's when the prices are high, because that's when demand is high.
Right.
Is
Right.
that too simplistic for the business world? Because I definitely
It's
live
not
on
too
the
simplistic.
energy
It's just
side.
no. I mean, you live on the energy side, but what you'll see, and I gathered some data from OHM Analytics about battery storage installations, and it's very interesting. Like in California, let's start with California. There have been somewhere on the order of several hundred projects, but not thousands of projects that have actually been installed anywhere between 150 kilowatts to 500 kilowatt hours and plus. There's really been a couple hundred since the beginning of time that have been installed. In Massachusetts, it's only been several handful of projects that have been installed, like a couple dozen sent from 2019 to 2025. So there is something. It's not as obvious, right? Part of it is that the utilities don't understand it. Part of it is really all business. So let me explain to you what we're doing at Sunrock, and I'm sure Nautilus and Green Day and everybody else is worried about. They're worried about how much do we need to safe harbor? Are we buying domestic content batteries or are we buying non-domestic content batteries? What are the battery details? Will my investor allow for any battery types other than Tesla Megapacks? Because right now, that is the only thing that is financeable. How am I going to get access to those Tesla Megapacks? It's a 22 plus week timeline to delivery. How am I going to get that warranty? Is there a preventative maintenance availability? How are we actually going to be balancing the plant for islanding or not? There are a
And you should
lot
say
of
what islanding
complications.
is, meaning that you operate essentially like a little mini grid as an off-grid island to yourself when the utility's down or when the prices from utility aren't favorable. You just operate internally.
That's right. That's exactly right. But administration has made it incredibly complicated for developers to actually get battery storage installed.
And I guess this is why maybe I'm too much in the physics world, but I regard this so funny because we're all used to batteries. Every single car has one. Every
Every
single
computer.
flashlight. These are
Yeah.
all batteries. Nobody worries and understands the chemistry very well. To me, it's the solar panel that's this new generation thing that I thought was going to be the bigger deal. But indeed, as you say, it's exactly right. Over the past 10 years, let's say, the learning curve about what solar panels do has been quite quick. The learning curve around batteries has actually been quite slow. And
I
I
wouldn't
don't think the
argue that. I don't
utilities.
think that's true. I
Okay,
think we
well, I'm
if
glad
you
to hear that.
well, I think you have to think about the timeline. To me, solar was sort of a very very early stage in the early 2000s when Jigger Shaw and I started Sun Edison in 2003. Definitely people didn't understand. The business community didn't understand solar modules. They didn't understand production warranties. They didn't understand, oh, if I put solar in this zip code, you can pretty much guarantee how many kilowatt hours I'm going to generate. And that market's completely changed in the last 20 years. I feel like battery storage today is probably like where solar was in 2002.
Okay, I think
And
I buy that. I think that's
yeah,
a
so I don't think it's that it's
fair view.
slow. I think it's that
Okay.
we haven't figured out all of the technology. At the same time, I'm not doomed and gloom at all, right? Technology improvements are driving costs down. There are economic certainties with battery storage, and that'll give rise to a lot of distributed generation opportunities.
And that's my hope. So I certainly, when I see new applications from PhD students or people who come to my lab because they want to think about a business startup, I would say 70% of those people coming in now, either they know of a battery chemistry they want to work with, or they have a client that says, hey, in the middle of the day when there's lots of solar, the price I will get for that is getting less and less interesting, which to me is a success on the sustainability side. But I really want to be able to capture all this late day demand, the neck of the duck, when utilities really do need to make sure there's enough new storage online so that the neck of the duck just becomes a business opportunity, not some crisis.
Right. But on the absolute other side of the spectrum, not in the bench, in the business world, it's becoming increasingly hard to actually finance these systems. We need to safe harbor equipment to make sure you get a certain percent of federal tax credit. Are you buying domestic content? Are you buying not domestic content? When do we have to buy the modules? What constitutes, beginning of construction, because that starts the trigger for when you're going to be able to get your tax credit. Prevailing wage rates keep changing every 6 months, and these projects take many, many months to develop and
But
actually
they're much
install.
faster than fossil fuel projects, right? So,
100%. Oh,
right.
100%.
So it
But
seems to me
prevailing
that this
wage,
is all an opportunity, right?
it's definitely an opportunity, and it's standardizing the development opportunity. That's all. It's just you need to really well understand what is the time to between order and delivery. So right now, a Tesla Megapack, which is the new battery storage with the new chemistry, is a 22-week delivery time.
So that sounds
And
so wonderfully fast to me. I mean, I'm loving it. You're talking
yeah,
weeks, whereas in the fossil fuel world, you're talking months to
years.
years for
Very much,
delivery
yeah.
time.
So I
Yeah.
mean, it's definitely relative, right? So, but at the same time, it is complicated because are you buying domestic content or not, and are they going to change the price in that period of time? And then do you need to get a letter ruling about what what tax accountants are going to assume in terms of what the value is of the solar and the storage? Do you have to separate the solar and the storage in order to be able to get all of the benefits that you want to get? It is complicated, and that's the answer to your question of why has it been hard to see lots of solar and storage developed. But I have a lot of hope. There is a company called OHM Analytics, OHM Analytics, which has been gathering data about solar and storage installations and storage only installations. So in Massachusetts, for example, from 2019 to basically mid 24, there have been a couple dozen storage installations that are, 150 kilowatt to 500 kilowatt hour plus projects. And let's see, probably, you know, a couple hundred in California since 2019.
Right. And
But
just to
what,
like interject one, so in my
yeah,
garage, 11.2 kilowatt hours of storage, and I'm one of several thousand homeowners who installed storage. I actually did it without a subsidy because I just wanted to have it in the house, and I'm waiting for the utility to say, we will now buy power from you, as opposed to just saying, you can bank as much power as you want, but we won't let you make any money. You can zero your bill, you just can't go, you can't go cash positive.
right. So at least what OHM Analytics is telling us is that from 2019 to today, anything from 0 kilowatt hours to above 500 kilowatt hours, there's only 1,800 projects in California that have been approved.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yep.
Right. And so there is a ton of opportunity, an absolute ton of opportunity, but we're just in early stages of battery storage. And you don't want to be the first, but you want to be a fast second or third or fourth.
So I guess for me, the closing salvo, and it's why the California story is interesting, and I'm now starting to see Massachusetts and Ireland all kind of going the same direction, is that for the last 117 days in a row, California has exported renewable energy to its neighboring states, some days just for 20, 30 minutes, other days for a couple hours. That tells me on the science side that we are winning, but from what I hear you
100%.
saying, we are not yet winning on the business side because it's still unclear, complex to say, I am now going to take advantage of that. Because if I'm a solar generator in California, I really then want to have storage so that I can then sell the power at this peak time of day. Or I can then be available if there's a blackout on something, so I will then be selling because the rates are going to go up in these real-time, minute-to-minute markets where the grid regulator is sending price signals because of dynamic events, clouds, rains, hailstorms. That's all wonderful business opportunity for these battery operators.
Absolutely. So you were saying in terms of opportunities, so many of your students are actually bringing
Yeah,
battery
this is where they want to
technologies
be
to
right
you.
now.
The other thing is tools like predictive analytics and time of use optimization and dynamic control. So companies can decide when to use or store or export their solar energy, which
Exactly.
reduces
So to
energy
me, this is like
bills. Yeah,
really exciting. So to me,
absolutely.
it's not that you should fear the duck; it's that you should be embracing the duck, and whether you like your Peking duck or your duck, confit or souffle, that this is like the perfect chance to say, let me get into this because this is where we're going, and more renewables means more and more opportunities for those with storage to clean up.
Yep, absolutely. And we will post a number of articles on energymatters.world about exactly these issues. There is so much happening in the market right now. I highly suggest if you're interested, reach out to us. We're happy to share the information we have. But I think in conclusion, it's not about avoiding the duck curve, but learning rather to work with it. And battery storage is going to have to solve that problem.
Yeah, it's time to eat the duck.
Time to eat the duck. Okay, with that, this is Energy Matters with Claire and Dan. You can check us out on energymatters.world. And thank you for listening.